After we moved in together, my husband's parents demanded a spare key, saying they needed to be able to stop by whenever they felt like it. Without thinking twice, my husband handed it over. I just smiled and stayed quiet. A week later, they let themselves in, only to find someone inside they definitely didn't expect, and no way back out. When Jack and I settled into our new place down in Phoenix, Arizona, I really thought we were stepping into a fresh chapter. We hadn't even hit our 1-year anniversary, and this house was meant to be our clean slate. It was a cozy little 2-bedroom in a peaceful neighborhood, just right for settling down, maybe even thinking about a family someday. But then came the drama. Jack's parents, Carl and Olivia, had always been a handful. Overbearing, constantly trying to run things, and completely clueless when it came to respecting boundaries. While we were dating, I'd gotten small previews, his mom blowing up his phone few times a day about vitamins, his dad checking in during our date nights. Sure, it got on my nerves, but I figured once we were married and had our own place, they'd finally ease up. I couldn't have been more wrong. We hadn't even spent a full day in our new home when Carl and Olivia showed up out of nowhere. No heads up, no invite. Just their car pulling into the driveway like they owned the place. I opened the door, barely got a word out, and Olivia was already stepping inside, glancing around like she was inspecting a hotel that didn't meet her standards. "Brought you a little something for the new place," she said, shoving a bottle of cheap wine into my hands. Right behind her, Carl came in holding a printed list of home upkeep tips, like we were teenagers who couldn't figure out how to run a dishwasher. I was already irritated, but then Olivia made herself comfortable on the couch, crossed her legs and asked, "So when do we get our spare key?" I blinked. "Excuse me." Carl laughed like I was being unreasonable. "Come on, sweetheart. Obviously we need a key." I asked what for. "In case there's an emergency," Olivia jumped in. "Or if we need to check in, water the plants, make sure everything's tidy." At that point, my brain just kind of stalled out. I looked at Jack, hoping he'd shut it down, but instead he nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense," he said, then handed them one of our house keys. I felt my entire body fill with rage, but I forced a smile. "Oh sure, you're totally right." That's when I started plotting. I decided to play it cool. For the next week, I was all sugar and charm. So much so that even Olivia stopped giving me suspicious looks. I thanked them for caring, made jokes about how helpful they were, even told them to swing by any time. What they didn't know was that I was laying a trap. Step 1. I installed a second lock on the inside of the front door. One of those heavy-duty hotel locks that only open from inside. Step 2. I set up a motion-activated camera in the living room that would ping my phone with any movement. Step 3. I made a very specific call to my Uncle Pool. Didn't have to wait long. Exactly a week later, Wednesday morning at 9:55, I got a notification motion detected in the living room. I opened the app and there they were, Carl and Olivia in my house. And they weren't just stopping by. They were snooping. I watched Carl go through the kitchen, pulling open drawers and cabinets like he was hunting for something. Olivia wandered into the living room, straightened the throw blanket on the couch, then started heading for our bedroom. What she did next almost made my head explode. She began folding my laundry. I stared at my screen, caught between disbelief and fury. They really thought they had the right to barge in, rifle through my stuff, and treat the place like they were babysitting a teenager. Then, right on schedule, they tried to leave. That's when things got interesting. I watched Carl head to the front door, twist the knob, nothing. He gave it another go, pulling harder. Still stuck. Olivia joined him, looking confused. Carl jiggled the handle again, then finally noticed the extra lock up top. He turned to Olivia, and I could see the color creeping up his face. "What the hell is this?" Carl barked. But before either of them could wrap their heads around what was happening, the basement door creaked open, and in walked Uncle Pool. Now, if you don't know Pool, he's definitely not the kind of guy you want to be stuck in a house with unexpectedly. He's a towering 6 feet 4 inches, completely bald, with a thick beard and tattoos running up his arms, most of which he drew himself. Back in the day, he was part of a biker gang, and even though he's cleaned up and now owns his own tattoo studio, he still gives off that "don't mess with me" vibe. He stepped into the living room, casually cracking his knuckles. "Well, well, well," he said in that gravel-deep voice of his. "What do we have here?" Carl froze on the spot. Olivia gave a little shriek and latched onto his arm. What the hell are you doing in our house? Carl demanded. Poole raised an eyebrow, calm as ever. Your house, he repeated. Olivia pointed at him with a shaky hand. You're trespassing, she said. Poole actually laughed, like, full-on laughed. That's cute, he said, pulling out a set of keys from his pocket. Because I live here. That's right. I'd sublet the place to Uncle Poole for the week, legally. With paperwork. Everything was filed properly through the landlord. What that meant was my in-laws had just broken into a home that was legally rented out to someone else. Carl's face turned the color of a tomato. Olivia looked like she was about to faint, still clinging to him like a life raft. Poole leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, not even remotely fazed. You're lying, Carl snapped, jabbing a finger at him like he was some teacher scolding a kid. You don't live here. Without a word, Poole pulled out a folded document and opened it slowly, too slowly, really milking the moment. Signed lease agreement, he said. Dated. Notarized. I'd made sure that thing was airtight. Carl snatched it from his hands and started reading it like he was hoping it would magically prove him right. Olivia peeked over his shoulder, lips quivering. This is absurd, she whispered. Poole just smirked. You know what's absurd? Walking into someone else's house uninvited. Carl ignored him and turned to Olivia. Call Jack. That's when my phone lit up with an incoming call from Jack. I picked up, and before I could say anything, I heard him panicked. What the hell is happening? He asked. I smiled. Not sure, Jack. Maybe you should ask your folks. He paused. They're saying there's a guy in the house claiming he lives there. Not just some guy, I replied. Uncle Poole. Silence. Heavy, dead silence. I took my time getting home, letting them marinate in their own mess for a bit. When I finally walked in, the tension was thick in the air. Olivia sat stiffly on the couch, arms folded so tight it looked painful. Carl stood by the door, still fuming. And Poole? He was chilling in the kitchen, sipping water like it was just another Wednesday. Hey babe, I chirped, tossing my bag on the counter. What's going on? You know exactly what's going on, Carl growled, his voice low and threatening. I acted confused. Do I? This, he snarled, shaking the lease in my face. This is total nonsense. I tilted my head, pretending to think. That's weird. The landlord didn't think so. That's when Olivia exploded. You think this is funny, don't you? She spat, jumping to her feet so fast the couch groaned under the shift. This little stunt? You've crossed a line. I crossed my arms and stared her down. Crossed a line? You mean like walking into my home without asking? Carl's hand balled into a fist. We have a key, he snapped. Poole let out a dry laugh. Oh yeah? And how's that working out for you? I bit my lip to stop myself from laughing too hard. Just then, Jack walked in, looking like he'd stepped into a battlefield. His eyes bounced between me, his parents, and Uncle Poole. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Olivia rushed over and grabbed his hand, putting on her most wounded expression. Jack, she said, her voice all broken. Did you know about this? He froze. Just long enough. Her eyes widened. You did, she whispered. You let her do this. Jack rubbed his face like he wanted to disappear. Mom, he started, but Carl had reached his limit. I want the key back, he barked. Right now. I didn't even entertain the idea. No. His nostrils flared. We're your family. We have a right to be here. I couldn't help myself, I laughed. Do you even hear yourself? A right? You don't have any right to this house. You don't own it. You don't pay for it. You don't live here. Carl stepped closer, eyes hard. You're making a big mistake. That's when Poole, who'd been quietly watching the show, let out a slow, low chuckle. Oh, I'd love to see where this goes, he said. Carl spun around and snapped, you shut your damn mouth. Poole just grinned. That grin Poole gave him? The kind that makes even the toughest guys second-guess themselves. I don't think I will, he said coolly. Olivia tugged at Carl's arm. Let's just go, she whispered, but he stayed rooted to the floor. You're going to regret this, he told me. I stared him down, unblinking. No, Carl, I said quietly. You're the one who's going to regret this. That night, after everything finally settled, Jack and I sat on the couch in silence. So he finally said, rubbing his hand through his hair, you think they're gonna hate you forever now? I shrugged. Probably. He let out a long sigh. I really screwed up, didn't I? I gave him a look. You gave your parents a key to our house without even telling me. He winced. Yeah. I kept my eyes on him. You honestly think they would have just checked on things? If I hadn't done what I did, they'd be in here every single day. He buried his face in his hands. Okay, I get it now. I messed up. I let out a slow breath. Good. We changed the locks the very next day. Days went by. No calls. No texts. Nothing from Carl or Olivia. I started thinking maybe, just maybe, they got the message. Then Friday morning rolled around. I got a call from our landlord. The moment I picked up, I could hear the tension in his voice. Hey, he said, I just got a strange call from some folks claiming to be your in-laws. My stomach dropped. They were asking about the lease, he continued. Fishing for info. I sat up straight. What kind of info? He hesitated. They wanted to know if there was any way to end your lease early. Ice. My blood turned to ice. They what? They even asked if I'd consider evicting you, he said, clearly irritated. Offered to pay out the remainder of the lease in full, just so they could move in. I gripped the phone so tightly my hand went numb. I already knew Carl and Olivia were entitled. Overbearing. But this? This wasn't just overstepping boundaries. This was war. I just sat there frozen, clutching the phone like it might bite me. Eviction. My in-laws had actually tried to evict us from our own home. Thankfully, my landlord wasn't an idiot. He laughed them off. Told them no way in hell was he canceling the lease for two strangers. Still, the fact that they tried? That was a whole new level of delusion. And I wasn't letting it go. I didn't tell Jack right away. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew exactly how he'd react. He still had this weird emotional leash when it came to them. Like he'd been raised to obey no matter what. Sure, he was starting to wake up to who they really were. But I didn't know if he was ready to handle this the way it needed to be handled. So I handled it myself. I drove straight to their house. When Olivia opened the door, she flinched. Hard. She was probably expecting a sweet visit from her precious son. Instead, she got me. Oh, she said, forcing a tight little smile. We weren't expecting you. I smiled right back. Yeah, I figured. Can I come in? She hesitated, then stepped aside. Big mistake. Carl was in the living room, beer in hand, legs sprawled like he didn't have a single care in the world. He barely looked up. What do you want? He muttered. I sat down across from him, laced my fingers together. Calm. Controlled. Focused. I know what you did. Olivia stiffened immediately. What are you talking about? I turned my attention to Carl. You tried to get us evicted. That got his attention. He sat up straight, beer hitting the table a little too loudly. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Want me to put the landlord on speaker? Silence. Olivia was wringing her hands, visibly anxious. Carl? He had the nerve to smirk. All right, he said, leaning forward. Let's say we did. Olivia gasped. Olivia's voice cracked sharp in the background, trying to reel Carl back. But he didn't care, he just waved her off like she was a fly buzzing too close. He knew I wasn't stupid. He knew I already knew. And frankly, he was done pretending. The cold, bitter realization hit me all over again. I'd walked into this house hoping for a final conversation, maybe even a truce, but what I got was confirmation. They planned it. Every bit of it. So I asked. Calmly. Too calmly. What was their endgame? Kick us out of our own home, take over the lease, and then what? Turn Jack back into their little project? A puppet they could keep close, micromanaged, emotionally cornered for life? Olivia, of course, acted offended, as if the very idea that they were manipulating their son was some kind of outrageous lie. She said they only wanted to be closer. That word, closer, tasted like rust. It was never about closeness. It was about control. It always had been. They didn't care what kind of destruction they left behind. Not as long as they could keep their hooks in Jack. And honestly, watching Carl's smugness fade when I said that out loud, it almost made the whole confrontation worth it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I simply stood and told them if they ever tried something like this again, there would be consequences. Real ones. No more playing nice. No more second chances. Olivia looked shaken, but Carl still sat there pretending to be the unbothered alpha. He didn't believe me yet. That would change. When I walked out that door, I truly believed I had ended it. I'd made myself clear. Or at least I thought I had. But within a week, we started noticing strange things. Little stuff at first, missing packages, tipped over trash bins. Inconveniences we could write off as coincidence, but my gut told me different. Then came the night everything changed. Jack and I were sitting in the living room, half watching a show we'd seen a dozen times when we heard a sound, loud, metallic, scraping. Something unnatural. Something too close. He muted the TV immediately and looked at me. I nodded without saying a word. We both stood and moved toward the door, every step thick with tension. Jack looked through the peephole first, and the way he froze told me everything. I didn't have to ask. I just looked. And there he was. Carl on our porch, standing like he owned the place. In his hand, a key, our old key. He must have just learned it didn't work anymore, because suddenly he was jiggling the doorknob like a man possessed, rattling it hard, shaking the entire frame. And when it didn't open, he started pounding. Jack didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, jaw clenched, heart probably racing. I knew that look. I knew what it meant to have your whole view of someone collapse in real time. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Carl shouted through the door, yelling about his right to be there, yelling that this was his son's house. The entitlement was staggering. As if blood alone gave him ownership of our home. I called out, calmly but firmly, telling him to leave. He didn't listen. Then I heard another voice, softer but somehow more disturbing, Olivia's, floating in from the side yard like she was in the middle of some twisted family reunion drama. I turned to the window and saw her standing there in the shadows, hands clasped together like a woman begging for forgiveness on a church stage. She called for Jack. Pleaded. Begged him to open the door and just talk. But I saw through it. The drama. The performance. The manipulation. Jack, to his credit, stood tall. He finally found his voice and told them to go. But Carl, he didn't take that well. He slammed the door so hard I actually flinched. And that's when something caught my eye. Motion sensor lights burst on in the backyard. I turned toward the back window and spotted a figure moving near the fence. Someone was back there. Someone was in our yard. My instincts took over. I didn't think, I just grabbed my phone and called the police. Carl was still ranting out front, pounding and yelling, but that didn't last long. Within minutes, red and blue lights lit up our street like a scene from a crime show. I walked outside with my phone still recording. And the second Carl saw the officers, his whole demeanor shifted. Gone was the barking alpha. In his place stood a man suddenly all smiles and raised palms, trying to look harmless. He told the cops it was all a misunderstanding. That this was his son's home. That he and his wife were just trying to talk. The officer turned to Jack. You could feel the air still. Do you know these people? Jack hesitated. Just for a second. Then he breathed out and said it. Words I knew would change everything. They're my parents, he said. And they're trespassing. In that one moment, everything shifted. Olivia gasped. Carl went pale. And Jack, he stood his ground. For the first time in his life, he chose me. Us. Our life. Our boundary. And I knew right then we were finally done letting them win. The moment Jack said it, that single word, trespassing, I saw Carl's entire expression harden. His jaw locked tight, and his hands curled into fists at his sides like he was physically holding back the explosion inside him. That was it. That was the instant he realized he'd lost control. Olivia looked like someone had ripped the air from her lungs. She gasped, wide-eyed and fragile, like the drama unfolding in front of her was just too much to bear. She called out to Jack, voice shaky and soaked in desperation, but he didn't even glance at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the officers as if they were the only ones keeping him grounded. There was something different in him in that moment. Maybe it was fear, maybe shame, or just the crushing weight of decades pressing down on his back, but whatever it was, he didn't fold. Not this time. For the first time in our entire relationship, I saw him stand his ground. Really stand. He told them they didn't live here. That they didn't have keys anymore. That they needed to go. His voice didn't shake, didn't falter, it carried that strange mix of clarity and exhaustion, like a dam finally giving out after years of pressure. One of the officers stepped forward and told Carl and Olivia they needed to leave. Carl didn't move right away. He stood rigid, his entire body vibrating with rage, but he wasn't foolish enough to take it further. Not with police watching. So instead he smiled this slow, cold, calculated smile that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't warm. It wasn't parental. It was dangerous. He said something cruel, something meant to stick like a thorn in Jack's heart. That one day Jack would regret all of this. That I would be the one to blame for taking everything from him. And while the words hurt, I didn't flinch. I saw the manipulation for what it was. Olivia by then had tears streaking down her face. She tried again, whispering out Jack's name like he was a lost child and she could still bring him home with enough pleading. But it didn't work. He didn't soften. His face was like stone when he finally spoke, quiet but firm. I hadn't taken anything from him. They had. And that was the moment Carl snapped. His mask dropped completely. Hands shaking, face red with fury, he looked at Jack with pure contempt and told him he wasn't his son anymore. Then he turned and walked away. Olivia hovered in place for a second, like she couldn't decide whether to follow or collapse right there on the lawn, but eventually she ran after him, sobbing. Neither of them looked back. The officers waited until they were completely out of the neighborhood before turning to us, asking if we wanted to press charges. Jack said no. He didn't even think about it. And then the house was silent. He sat down on the couch, shoulders slumped, eyes locked on the floor like he was staring straight into everything he'd just lost. I didn't say anything. I didn't touch him. I just sat beside him, close enough to feel his breathing, far enough to give him space. It took a long time, but eventually he spoke, just a whisper really. He said they hated him now, that his father had meant every word. I didn't argue. He needed the truth, not a fairy tale. And yeah, it was true. Carl had meant it. Jack's hands balled into fists. He was trying to process everything at once: grief, anger, betrayal, guilt. He admitted he didn't know what to feel. I reached for him, and this time he didn't pull away. That small gesture said more than anything else. After a long pause, he said something even quieter. That some part of him had always known this day would come. I didn't reply, because the truth was deep down. I had known too. The days that followed were hollow. No calls. No texts. Just silence. It was almost eerie, like the calm after a hurricane when everything's broken, but nothing's moving. And then one morning, Jack checked his email, and I knew something was wrong the second I saw his face. He froze, pale, unreadable. I asked what it was, and without saying a word, he turned the screen toward me. It was from a lawyer. A cease and desist order. At the top in bold, Carl and Olivia. They were accusing us of alienation, of cutting them off from their son, and demanding that we restore communication to its natural and expected state. I couldn't believe it. After everything they'd done, they were now trying to legally force Jack to reconnect, like he was a possession they were entitled to. Jack read the words aloud, almost in a trance. Then he gave this short, bitter laugh, half amusement, half heartbreak. All I could feel was nausea. After years of suffocating him with control, they were now scrambling for legal chains to reel him back in. He sat back, staring at the screen for what felt like a lifetime. And then slowly he closed the laptop. And smiled. "They're desperate," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried something I hadn't heard in a long time. Peace. He looked at me with this quiet certainty, a calmness in his eyes I hadn't seen in weeks, maybe longer. I tilted my head, not sure if I was reading it right. But then he gave me a small nod. Yeah, he meant it. Then slowly he reached for my hand. Just that one simple gesture, and I knew. I knew we'd made it through. We had won. We sent one final message. Just one sentence. No anger, no drama. Just, do not contact us again. Then we shut the door. Blocked everything. Phones, emails, social media. Every single crack where they might try to slip back in, we sealed it. But of course they tried. They always do. Fake phone numbers, strange anonymous emails, even a holiday card that somehow got misdelivered to the wrong address. As if they thought we'd be swayed by nostalgia or guilt wrapped in festive paper. But we didn't fall for any of it. And little by little, their noise started to fade. No more manipulation. No more guilt trips. Just quiet. It took Jack time to untangle himself from everything. Healing didn't happen overnight. Some days I could see it hit him. The weight of everything he'd left behind, everything they drilled into him for years. The guilt crept in like fog. Doubt too. That deep, buried instinct to obey, to not rock the boat, to keep the peace, even when the peace was poison. But then one night we were sitting out on the porch. It was calm, just us and the hum of our little street, the kind of evening where everything feels suspended in gold. He turned to me, almost out of nowhere, and said it with a breath of surprise. "I feel free." I didn't say much. I just squeezed his hand. Because he was. He exhaled like something had finally loosened in his chest. Then, with a small smile, he looked over and asked if we could invite Uncle Poole over sometime. Said the man deserved a cold beer after everything. I laughed. And in that moment, sitting beside him in the warm stillness of our home, I realized we were going to be okay. People always say family is forever. But I've learned the truth. Real family doesn't chain you. Real family doesn't twist love into control or debt or fear. Real family loves you for who you are, not for how well you obey. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is walk away. And when you do, that's when you finally feel it. Freedom.